Ramzan Kadyrov, the leader of Chechnya, is on the verge of death. And remember, this isn't just my opinion. Ukrainian military intelligence claims that his kidneys are no longer functioning, that he's on dialysis, and that doctors have stopped giving prognoses. And you might be wondering, wait a minute, why should I care what happens to the leader of some godforsaken religion? Well, you may not care, but for Vladimir Putin, this could be one of the greatest threats he faces. A threat that would jeopardize not only the war in Ukraine, but also the very integrity of Russia itself. The fact is, Chechnya is a veritable separatist powder keg, one that has already erupted twice in recent history, causing 2 wars that have cost the empire more than 100,000 lives. What's more, there are several battalions of Chechens currently fighting in Ukraine against Kremlin troops. For them, this war is merely training for what truly matters: the day they can return to their mountains and fight once again for an independent Chechnya. Just take a look at the words of Adam Osmayev, the commander leading one of these volunteer groups.
I am certain that this war will end with Russia's defeat. Conscientious Chechens will have to restore order in Chechnya once the Russian government collapses. There's a lot of work to be done. That's why we're establishing ties with Ukraine here, so that they can help us restore order in the Caucasus later on.
And yes, of course, there are also those fighting on the Russian side, the troops loyal to the local president. Because the truth is that, so far, the risk of a new revolution has been kept in check precisely thanks to Kadyrov. In a way, he's a good ally of Putin's. The problem? Well, as we've said, he's on the verge of death. And the chosen successor is none other than his son, Adam, an 18-year-old who offers no assurance that peace in Chechnya can be maintained for long. All the more so when many Chechens have been waiting for years for a rift like this to open up so they can launch a new revolution. Conclusion, it's not far-fetched to think that Chechnya could once again become a powder keg, and that a new conflict could flare up for Putin while he's still grappling with the Ukraine. That's why the questions we are asking are: how close are we to revolution breaking out in Chechnya? What will this mean for Vladimir Putin's government? And what implications might it have for the war in Ukraine, where Russia is not exactly in its prime? We'll take a look at all of that in this video. But first, if you're interested in the world of investing, if you want to learn how to manage your savings, protect yourself against inflation, and figure out how to make money beyond your day job, well, I've got some good news for you. Here at Visual Factory, we have created the Visual Factory Club, a newsletter where every week we send out free content focused on essential financial education, the ABC of what everyone should know to understand the stock market, financial markets in general, investment platforms, how to assess investment opportunities, and which markets may have more or less potential. Because of course, if you want to invest your money so you're not at the mercy of your country's economic instability, you at least need to understand the basics of the financial world. In the Visual Factory Club, you'll learn all of this completely free of charge. Through the link below and this QR code, you can sign up for the club and start receiving the upcoming editions. What's more, when you sign up, you'll receive a dossier where I explain in a clear and simple way the most essential investment concepts, what multiples or the PE ratio are, what indices are, ETFs, derivatives, funds, EPS, you get the idea. After that, every week you'll receive additional materials and market analysis to help you stay informed about what's going on. And by the way, the sooner you sign up, the better. Since we send each episode of the series by email, and every edition is unique, if you're not subscribed, you might miss some of them, and you won't be able to access them later. But with that said, let's get into the video. To understand the mess that could be coming Putin's way, you first need to understand who the Chechens are. And to do that, the first step is to locate them on the map. Chechnya is here in the North Caucasus, nestled between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, right on the mountainous border separating Russia from Georgia. It's a tiny territory, about 17,000 square kilometers, with a population of barely 1.5 million. Seen this way, it seems impossible that such a small place could have caused an empire so many headaches. And yet, that is exactly what happened. Let me explain why. The key is that the Chechens are nothing like the Russians, not in language, not in religion, and above all, not in how they organize themselves. Chechen society is tribal. It's organized, it's structured into clans, known as tapes, large extended families that owe loyalty to one another, and that for centuries have governed themselves through councils of elders and their own codes of honor. There were never any Tsars or nobility here. Authority does not come from the state, it comes from the clan. Keep this in mind because it will be a recurring theme throughout the video. In Chechnya, power is personal, and religion is intertwined with this way of organizing. The Chechens have been Sunni Muslims for centuries, and they practiced this religion within a country with an Orthodox Christian majority. Well, put it all together, a mountain people, tribal, Muslim, and obedient only to their own. Could anyone really have imagined they would integrate peacefully into Russia? A Russia traditionally characterized by a highly centralized power structure and dependent on Moscow. Well, that's exactly what history has shown. Russia arrived in the Caucasus 200 years ago, and just subduing the region took nearly half a century of war until it managed to annex it in the mid-19th century. And did the resistance end there? Far from it. The Chechens have risen up against Moscow every time they've had the chance. Just to give you an idea of how determined they are, they did so even at the worst possible moment, in the midst of World War II. While Nazi Germany was advancing toward the Caucasus, guerrilla fighters were already waging war against Soviet rule in the Chechen mountains, and some, following the old logic that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, even saw Hitler as an opportunity to finally rid themselves of Moscow. It was something Stalin never forgave. And in 1944, he did something as brutal as it is hard to imagine. He accused the entire Chechen people, every single one of them, of being traitors and collaborators, and he decided to wipe them off the map, not by killing them, but by uprooting them from their land, deporting the entire nation to Central Asia. And when we say entire, we mean entire. Virtually 100% of the population, some 400,000 people, were crammed into cattle cars bound for Kazakhstan. It's estimated that about a quarter of them died, and the survivors were not allowed to return home until 1957, when Khrushchev permitted their return. It's something the Chechens have never forgotten, and that memory explains almost everything that came afterwards. Because when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the Chechens saw a golden opportunity. And what did they do? Precisely, they declared their independence. Moscow held off for 3 years without reacting. But December 1994, Yeltsin sent in the tanks. On paper, it was supposed to be a military walk in the park, lasting only a couple of weeks. In practice, it was a historic disaster. The Chechens turned their capital, Grozny, into a death trap for Russian armored vehicles and bled the army, the successor to the Soviet one, dry for 2 years with pure guerrilla warfare. The situation reached such a point that in 1996, Russia was forced to sign a peace agreement and withdraw. Chechnya remained a de facto independent republic. Real power ended up in the hands of warlords like Shamil Basayev, a hero of the First War for many Chechens, and at the same time a radical who gradually drifted toward jihadism under the influence of Katab, an Arab commander who had come from the Afghan war zone. Kidnappings as a national industry, attacks, Islamic courts, Chechnya became a black hole. And in August 1999, Basayev and Katab made the mistake that changed everything. They invaded Dagestan, the neighboring republic, in hopes of spreading their Islamic revolution there. And just take a minute to consider what that meant. Dagestan is and was territory of the Russian Federation. In other words, in practice, that de facto independent Chechnya set out to invade Russia. And that wasn't all. Weeks later, a series of attacks on apartment buildings killed nearly 300 people while they slept in Moscow and other cities. The Kremlin blamed Chechen terrorists, and a former KGB agent who had just been appointed prime minister saw the perfect opportunity to go down in history and seize control. That man was none other than Vladimir Putin himself. Putin promised to hunt down the terrorists, even in the bathroom, and launched the Second War. This time, there was no blindly sending in tanks like in 1994. Russia crushed Chechnya with massive, systematic bombings. Grozny was so devastated that the UN went so far as to call it the most destroyed city on the entire planet. But guess what? Even with that, the Chechen fighters didn't give up. They took to the mountains and brought the war to the rest of the country. Guerrilla warfare in the Caucasus Mountains and terror in the heart of Russia.
In October 2002, a Chechen commando unit stormed the Dubrovka Theater in Moscow in the middle of a performance and took more than 700 hostages. Russian forces responded by flooding the building with a secret gas. About 90 hostages died, most from the gas itself. Later, in September 2004, another commando unit seized a school in Beslan on the first day of the school year, taking more than 1,100 hostages. After 3 days of hell, the final assault left 334 dead. Half of them were children. In March 2010, 2 women carried out suicide bombings in the Moscow metro during rush hour, killing 40 people.
Now then, how did Russia manage to put an end to all that? Well, here's where it gets interesting, because it didn't do so with more bombings. Very soon, Moscow realized that it could spend decades chasing guerrillas and terrorists through the mountains, and that this was simply unfeasible. So it changed its strategy. The plan was called Chechenization, and the idea was as simple as it was devious, that the war against the Chechens would be won by other Chechens. And so Russia began offering amnesties to fighters who switched sides. Amnesty, and sometimes certain privileges as well. So thousands did just that. Former guerrillas who knew every trail, every hiding place, and every face in the resistance were now hunting down their former comrades. Well, with that machine in motion, the Russian security services eliminated the rebel leaders one by one. Maskhadov fell in 2005 and Basayev in 2006. Eventually, what remained of the insurgency scattered across the Caucasus or fled abroad. And so in 2009, Moscow officially declared the war over. But there was one problem. In order for Chechenization to work, Putin was missing one piece, the most important one of all. He needed a Chechen with real authority, someone the clans would respect, who was willing to rule this hornet's nest on Moscow's behalf. And the man he found was just the man for the job. Although, to be honest, he actually found him long before declaring the war over. Mind you, this isn't the Kadyrovov you all know. This isn't Ramzan, the one from the videos, the medals, and the private army. No, in this case we're talking about his father, Ahmad Kadyrov. The thing is, Ahmad had exactly what Moscow needed. Two weapons. The first was religious authority. He had been a mufti, the spiritual leader of the Chechens. And the second, a powerful clan behind him. Well, Ahmad, who had fought against Russia in the First War, switched sides and began offering the guerrillas a deal to lay down their arms and join him. Presenting himself as the man capable of restoring order, he sealed the original pact with the Kremlin: control and loyalty in exchange for money, local power, and backing. However, in 2004, Ahmad was blown to bits. Literally. A bomb killed him during a Victory Day parade in Grozny, and then the entire machinery, the pact, and the power passed into the hands of his son, Ramzan. Ramzan took his father's legacy and fortified it in his own way. He neutralized and eliminated any rival with military clout and connections in Moscow, and he did so until, within Chechnya, stability and his own person became one and the same. No one else. No one to overshadow him. Neither friends nor enemies, just him. So how did Putin seal the deal? Through an exchange. The fact is, peace in Chechnya was never a military victory. It was a pact. Moscow put two things on the table: money in abundance and almost total autonomy. In exchange, it demanded two things: absolute loyalty to the Kremlin and stability within the Republic. In other words, you keep Chechnya peaceful and loyal to Russia, and we won't set foot there or ask what you're doing within its borders. That was the deal. And that deal has sustained the Chechen status quo for nearly 20 years, a structure built on three very simple pillars. The first is federal funding. Chechnya is one of the most heavily subsidized republics on the entire planet. Around 80% of its budget comes directly from Moscow. And to see where that money goes, there's no better example than the capital itself, Grozny. Look at what it was like at the end of the wars. It was a city literally razed to the ground, reduced to rubble. And now look at how it is today. Skyscrapers, gleaming avenues, and one of the largest mosques in Russia and Europe. A spectacular transformation that has been paid for entirely with rubles from Moscow. And that same money is what oils the entire machinery of Kadyrov's regime. It paid for the reconstruction. It pays the salaries of the loyalists who support him. And it feeds a slush fund that he controls almost single-handedly. And of course, above all, it pays for his greatest life insurance, his own army. And that is precisely the second pillar, his private army, the Kadyrovtsi. Tens of thousands of armed men who, on paper, are part of the Russian National Guard, but in practice answer only to Kadyrov.
Its hardcore consists of the so-called Akhmat Special Forces, which, according to estimates, range in size from 4,000 to 13,000 men. Surrounding them is a loose network of loyal units numbering in the tens of thousands. This is no amateur force. The Akhmat force operates almost like a miniature army, with its own intelligence, artillery units, drone teams, and even medical services. An autonomous structure, practically a state within a state.
And where have they been seen in action? Primarily in Ukraine. When the invasion broke out, Kadyrov turned the war into his grand showcase. He even boasted of having sent 26,000 Chechen fighters, 7,000 of them on the front lines, and created a dozen new battalions bearing the Akhmat brand out of thin air. But watch out, because there's a catch here. These men have ended up with a nickname that says it all: the TikTok Army. Why? Well, because much of their presence in Ukraine has been more propaganda than combat. Heroic videos recorded for social media, firing at positions that were already empty. Pure theatre. In fact, many analysts agree that their role is psychological rather than military. They are the muscle Moscow flaunts to intimidate, rather than the force it actually sends to the front lines. In any case, don't let the meme fool you, because their role in Ukraine is one thing and their role at home is quite another. The fact is that within Chechnya, this force is absolutely real and and absolutely feared. In Chechnya, they don't record videos for TikTok. There, they are Kadyrov's political police. They are the ones who keep watch, who make arrests, who make people who are a thorn in the regime's side disappear. They are the ones who show up at dawn at the home of anyone who criticizes the tyrant, and often at the homes of their families as well. Their true mission is not to take Konstantinovka, it's to keep all of Chechnya in line, so that no one, absolutely no one, dares to raise their head. And this brings us to the third pillar, the personal pact with Putin. And take note, because this pact has become far more crucial given everything that has happened to Russia since the start of the war. You see, in recent years, Russia has changed dramatically, and so has the way power is distributed within the country. Today, more than ever, only one thing truly matters: proximity to Putin. And if you want to dig deeper and understand exactly how power has shifted in Russia, we recently published this video here on VisualPolitik with all the details. By the way, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on content like this. If you haven't already, now is the perfect time. It's just one click. In any case, this proximity is crucial because Kadyrov isn't accountable to the typical structures of the Russian state. He doesn't answer to the Ministry of the Interior. He doesn't answer to any governor. He answers to one man, Putin, and he does so directly. It's not an agreement between institutions, it's an agreement between two people. And why does this change absolutely everything? Because when an agreement is between institutions, it's more likely to survive. The minister changes, the governor changes, and the pact remains in place. But an agreement between two specific men usually dies with them. In short, order in Chechnya rests on three pillars that share the same structural flaw. They depend on a single person. And that VisualPolitik community brings us to the million-dollar question. What will happen the day Kadyrov is no longer there? This is the big question. And we're going to be honest with you, it's impossible to know. Unfortunately, we do not have a crystal ball. That said, there are several possibilities that, at first glance, may be the most likely. The first is the one Kadyrov himself is rapidly putting in place, turning Chechnya into a legacy passed from father to son. We've told you this before. Kadyrov is betting heavily on his son Adam, whom he has been showering with positions and honors, exactly what his father did for him when he came to power. But take note, because this isn't the only thing he's doing. He's also reinforced this strategy with a second move. He has been marrying his children to the children of his top aides. The most talked about case is that of his daughter Tabarik, whom he married off to Ramzan Vizmuradov, the son of one of the most powerful security chiefs. And he's done the same with the rest. One daughter married to the son of his former interior minister, another related to a high-ranking government official. A veritable web of marriages in the tradition of the Catholic monarchs. And this matters a great deal in Chechnya because don't forget that Chechen society is organized into clans. There, family, blood, and lineage matter immensely. In other words, through these marriages, Kadyrov is tying the regime's major clans to the fate of his own family, making it extremely costly for anyone who, in the future, might think of turning their back on their own people. Of course, even that isn't enough to secure the family lineage. And this is where things get ugly for Adam, because these inheritances from father to son, especially when they're arranged so hastily, tends to cause problems, and even more so when the heir is so young. There are countless examples of every kind, and those who end up winning usually do so for the same reason, because they've played their cards right, and have managed to eliminate any rivals. Ramzan himself did this when he succeeded his father, and so did, to give another example, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, who went so far as to execute his own uncle to consolidate his power. Well, Adam, so far, hasn't eliminated anyone. Will he be able to do it? That remains to be seen. Of course, keep an eye out because there's another key player in this game, and he's not Chechen. It's Putin himself. Let's remember that he's the one who, to a large extent, is footing the bill for the whole show, so his word could tip the scales one way or the other. If Putin decides to strongly support the son, and personally takes it upon himself to sweep away any rivals, or to surround him with clans and trusted men who will act as regents until he matures, then Adam does have a good chance. However, the fact that everything depends largely on Putin's favor is also his greatest weakness, because that support, just as he could give it to Adam, could also be given to anyone else. And this is where the second major option comes in: Kadyrovism. Without Kadyrov. What does this mean? It's quite simple. Deep down, the Chechen model works for Moscow. What it doesn't want is to change the machine, just the face. Keep the apparatus of repression and control intact, but with another man in charge, neither a son nor a dynasty. A replacement. And who might those replacements be? Well, there are a few names floating about, and it would be a good idea to be familiar with them. The first, and perhaps the strongest contender, is Magomed Daudov, the enforcer of internal purges, the man who has done the dirty work for years and has held the highest offices in the Republic. A man feared even by the Chechens themselves. The second is Adam Delimkhanov, Kadyrov's cousin, a deputy in Moscow, and his right-hand man for a long time. A man with his own networks, his own muscle, and direct contacts in the Kremlin. And the third is Abuzaid Vizmuradov, the religious leader to whom Kadyrov married off his daughter to Barik, another heavyweight in the security apparatus. And take note of what these three have in common, because it's crucial to everything. They are ruthless, they control their own armed men, and their loyalty lies with Putin far more than with the Kadyrov family name. That makes them the perfect successors for Moscow if it seeks smooth continuity, but also a huge threat to the current leader's family. And that brings us to the third option, the one the Kremlin has been trying to bury for 2 decades, for everything to blow up. Because don't forget what kind of people we're dealing with. Chechnya carries the scars of centuries of resistance against Russia on its shoulders. The imperial conquest, the deportation of the entire nation to Central Asia in 1944, and 2 wars that left the country in ruins. And that resentment has not vanished under Kadyrov. And this is crucial, that sentiment has not disappeared. It has been crushed, which is quite different. The regime does not rely on the people's affection, but on fear and collective punishment. It is, so to speak, a pressure cooker with the lid tightly sealed. Why hasn't it exploded yet? Well, not because the Chechens lack anger. If anything, it's because they lack the opportunity. They are exhausted from 2 wars, and know that every time they have risen up, Moscow has returned and crushed them. That's why they rebelled only when Russia was weak or looking the other way. In the chaos of 1917, during the Soviet collapse of 91, never when Moscow was strong. And that leads us to a disturbing conclusion. The Chechen uprising doesn't depend on Chechnya. It depends on a rift opening up within Russia, a defeat in Ukraine, a crisis in the Kremlin, or the security apparatus splitting in 2 during the succession. Right now, there is no leader to spearhead it. True. But the history teaches us that when the time is right, leaders appear out of nowhere within a matter of weeks. And that is ultimately the big question we're posing to you. Do you think that rift in Russia could open up right when Kadyrov dies? Leave us your thoughts in the comments, and if you like the video, you know the drill, hit the like button and subscribe. Take care, I'll see you next time.